better. So really quickly, first off, you might be wondering why this great film is behind me. Can anyone tell me why I would be playing Mean Girls behind me right now?
Because you like them?
That's so fetch.
Yeah, because we're about to make fetch happen. That's also why I'm wearing pink. And if you're also wearing pink, you're in the right place right now. Cool. So today we make fetch happen. This is a really exciting week for you all because this is the week where you can officially put full stack developers on your resume. By Thursday, that is a thing you can ostensibly do because you will have the ability to build a front end app and have a back end app and make them both talk to each other. And that's what we're doing this week. So after this week, if you have the word aspiring on your LinkedIn, get it out of there. You're a full stack developer. Cool. All right, let's talk about Twitter. So this is Twitter. This is not my main account. I don't trust the people I follow enough for that. But so a couple of things about Twitter. First off, nobody should ever do it. But if you did, right? Let's think about this, right? I'm scrolling down. And you're noticing I continue to see some tweets, right? I keep seeing tweets whenever I scroll down. These keep coming up. There seems to be no end to these bad boys, right? Like if you look, right? I'm following 26 people, right? And I have one follower. JavaScript trends. They're on point here. So I have 26 followers, right? Or it's followees, people who I follow. On my main account, I think I follow like 2,000, right? And I have myself tweeted, I think like 7,000 times, right? So when I load up Twitter, right? And I'm sorry for all of that. I shouldn't be tweeting. I know it's bad. But when I load up Twitter, right, on my main account, right, given that I have like 2,000 followees, right, people who I follow, and I personally have like 6,000 tweets, right? Do you think how do you think we load all this up? Do you think that it goes, oh, cool, this person has 6,000 followers, and they between them have like a million likes or a million tweets? Should I just load that up and send that to the browser? Like, and then like that's how we keep scrolling here. How does this happen? How can we keep scrolling here? Do you think it just serves me all these tweets at once? No, that would be ridiculous, right? Asking it, hey, give me the million tweets that Nikki could potentially be looking at, depending on his combination of his followers, things that I want to advertise to him, and interests that we tried to launch, but then we didn't actually make launch successfully. So now we just force people into it. Like Twitter isn't loading up a million tweets, right? We just know that that's not the case, right? So what do we think is going on? It's querying for posts from the people I follow, right? When is it doing it? What do you think it like how many tweets am I being served? How is it that I can just keep scrolling forever? Asynchronous loading. That's a really good use of two terms that we're going to be talking about today. Yeah, what's probably happening is there's probably some event listener sitting at the bottom of this page being like, hey, they're about to run out of tweets. And that means they might leave your hell site. If you want to keep breaking their brain, you need to load up tweets right now before they get bored and do anything else that would be more productive with their lives, right? Twitter has to think that way, right? And so what it's doing, like we can actually see if we scroll fast enough, you get this little spinny bar, and then it gives you more tweets, right? But rather than just having me assert this, right, I'm going to go ahead and pull up the network tab of the Chrome DevTools. Has anyone made this part of their workflow when they were working on Rails? Did anyone play around with it? It's awesome. The Chrome dev tools are a really great way to like debug things that happen when you're making network requests, because it tells you everything you need to know about a network request. It's also fun for hacking and for playing around with. The network tab specifically, right? When I refresh the page, you'll notice I get this huge cascade of stuff. I get a bunch of different files, a bunch of different data types, images, a bunch of things like that. I'm going to see if I can make this more legible. And then like I can click into these, right? I can be like, hey, what is this? And it'll be like some weird JavaScript thing. And you can like click into the headers and you can see like, hey, this was the URL you made a request to. You made a GET request. And the response was a bunch of cool stuff, right? There's a lot of other cool things you can do with it. Like, for example, I'm going to be clicking on this. This was a more fun lecture before they just added the word fetch to this little button like a week ago. So that gives away the button that I'm probably going to click on. You can filter out the requests and responses you received by like, you can be like, hey, I want all the images that I got. And then like, it'll give you like, hey, you found this image that is an icon for a person. You have like this emoji. You have this thing. You have this picture of some random person's profile picture, right? But I can go to fetch XHR, right? And I bet somewhere in here is going to be a bunch of tweets. And we can find out how many. So you'll notice like there's a bunch of XHR and fetch calls right here. I'm just going to click in on this one. Ooh, fun. That's unusual. Cool. I think JavaScript is enabled in my browser. It would be probably pretty bad if it wasn't. It probably means that my ad blocker hit something. Boop, boop, boop. Here we go. Cool. So I can like click in here. I see this home.json question mark include profile, blah, blah, blah. This is the whole route we're getting to. Most of these are query string parameters right here. It's really timeline/home/JSON. You can actually like look around here and see kind of what they're doing a little bit. If you really want to play around, you'll see things. Let's see if there's anything fun here. You get like my bearer authorization token, which I probably shouldn't be broadcasting, but this is my non-Twitter account, right? So this is like, we're a little bit familiar with this from like authorization tokens. We've got a big cookie with a lot of information about ourselves, right? And then a bunch of other things like, hey, I guess I want retweets, include a bunch of other things. So this is nuts. And we can like look at our response, right? Or we can, let's like preview it and look, we can actually see if we open up these tweets, we actually have this little array of tweets, right? And it's like, looks like around 40 or 50 tweets, right? You can like click in on one of them. You can be like, I'm a box model. Okay. And you can find a bunch of data about all these tweets, right? Now, if I continue, so this is, it was like all.json, whatever. I'm going to start scrolling down now and see if we can get to the point where we load up some more tweets. Cool. And this looks good. Look, it gave me more tweets. As I scrolled down, it knew to go fetch some more tweets for me, right? Because there's some event listener somewhere. Be like, when they get to this point, start loading up more tweets. And that's the technology we're going to be talking about for the next 2 days or next 2 lectures. Cool. How are we feeling about that? So we're probably not going to build infinite scroll. That requires a little bit of logic on the back end. But how do we feel about how this works? You can believe that it works? Cool. I'm also going to just one more example, because this is the one that really put Google Maps on the map, so to speak. If we go to Google Maps, right? First off, you're going to like see all my favorite, like all the bars that I've just like, so let's go over here. Let's go over here. Cool. So I'm going to clear this really quickly. I'm going to open up a fetch XHR request. And do you think it loads up all the map, like the information on the map for me right off the top of the bat? Like, do you think it's just waiting? If I opened this up in Hong Kong, it would still know about Vince Lombardi's service area in New Jersey? No, right? Instead, whenever we make a scroll, it makes a whole lot of network requests that look really weird. Actually, I've been to Vince Lombardi service area. Yeah, that's a legit place. We're not disproving the fact that the only thing New Jersey has going for it is a turnpike. But it is a legitimately a good service area. And so yeah, so this is kind of how a lot of the modern internet works, right? With JavaScript and fetch solving these problems for us, right? So before I get into anything, anyone confused about space farms, zoo and museum? Sorry, is anyone else confused about what's going on here before we go into it? Yeah, what's up, Raquel?
So what fetch does is it just gets the data that's on the area that you're at, and it looks for event listeners, or
no. So I gave two different examples, right? That both are triggered by event listeners, because most things in JavaScript are, right? They're either triggered by the page load or another event listener, right? But what fetch really is at the heart of it, and I'm about to explain what it's doing, is it is a way to, in your browser, make a network request to another server, right? So to, in your code, ask someone else's server, hey, can you give me some information about tweets, right? Or something like that. So if we remember, in Ruby, when we would hit APIs and we'd be like, hey, can you give me these 50 restaurants, right? JavaScript will allow us to do that in the browser without breaking things and use that to render things onto the page.
So the way fetch works on Google Maps, does it try to grab the longitude and latitude of the location that you're trying to zoom in on? I'm not really.
That might be a good guess, right? I imagine it takes a look at you. It's okay, this person's looking at this thing right now. Let's load this up. It becomes a little bit hard when you figure out what's Google doing now, because at a certain point they probably came up with a bunch of efficiencies to do something crazy. But yeah, this is probably what's happening. Is it's hey, they're now over here. Go make a fetch and ask what stuff's over there. And you remember, back in Rails, when we were doing that Yelp stuff, we actually were hey, looking at this zip code, give me all the restaurants in that zip code. And that was a thing we could do with the Yelp API, right? So imagining now we had an API that would just, if you give it a specific location, would yield you the stuff in there, and then it would know to render it, right? That's probably what Google Maps has under the hood. And it's just triggering when we move the map.
Sorry. So what's the event listener listening for on Google Maps? Is it listening for?
Oh, I have no idea. Probably mouse movement, maybe. It certainly looks like mouse movement, right? If we do, you open up our network request. Currently, nothing's happening. Then I do this, and suddenly I get a bunch. So when you click and drag, maybe they might have some weird sort of thing going on here. I have no idea. But yeah.
Thank you.
So at this point, where's my code? All right. Let's talk a bit more about fetch. And then we'll get into actually doing some coding. But I want you to understand what it's capable of before we go ahead and do start defining things. So really quickly, when we say fetch, what it really is it's a newer syntax. There's actually an even newer syntax for fetch called async await, which if you want to write a blog on it, please do. I might like give a little pod on it at some point where I start using async await. It's just a different syntax for writing fetch that solves a couple of problems. But Ajax requests is really what fetch does for us. Does anyone know what Ajax stands for?
Asynchronous JavaScript.
Yeah. Asynchronous. I think I might have said this before and been slightly wrong. It's actually and XML HTTP request.
That sounds right.
Yeah. So this is a little bit more, right? Let's give us this. This is, you don't really need to know what XML, like I'm not teaching you it because I don't know it. It stands for extensible markup language. So really when we say Ajax, we're saying asynchronous JavaScript and extensible markup language hypertext transfer protocol request, something like this, something really normal, something that totally everyone can understand. What we're really doing is we're using JavaScript to send a request on the internet and get a response back from a server, which is something you've done before in Ruby. Unfortunately, in JavaScript, there's a couple of interesting things. The other thing, right, that I kind of want to talk about, right? Let's see if I can pull this up again, right? Can anyone tell me, what does this look like? This response look like? What data structure?
Hash.
Looks like a hash. Yeah, a hash or in a JavaScript object, very similar to a hash, right? What do we think JSON means?
JavaScript object notation.
Yeah. Why do you think we call it that?
It's converting into plain text, HTML.
Yeah, it's definitely different than plain text, right? And that this looks like a JavaScript object, right? We've got like the curly braces on the end. We have a bunch of keys. We have a bunch of little hashes that you can throw in there for some reason. This is basically an object, right? Which is why we call it JavaScript object notation. So when we're talking about making a fetch, we're making an XHR request. Uh-oh. Did I miss that? XHR is what XML HTTP request is short for. We're making it like an Ajax call, right? To somewhere, right? And hoping to get back data, preferably in JavaScript object notation. You can get back data in other ways. But right now, the vast majority of what you'll be doing is parsing JSON data. You can like be like, hey, can you give me some HTML data? And then you'll start like parsing HTML in JavaScript. And that's a huge pain in the ass. And I would recommend not doing it if you have the opportunity. But for now, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using JavaScript to make requests to a server and get responses, and then use that to manipulate our DOM. Cool? It's at this point that I'm definitely going to turn off Mean Girls, just because I'm about to start like teaching stuff. So real quick, there's one thing that I'm going to be working with for a little bit of time today, Dog CEO. This is a good API. And what it allows us to do is it allows us to fetch, to grab a random dog. Cool. If I go over here, I will get JSON for a random dog. This case, that's not a dog. That is something haunting. But right. So this is going to be helpful for us. In Ruby, right? When we want to make a request to a server, we would do something like this, right? Let's do Ruby sync.rb. Oop. Yep. So REST client. Cool. Ruby sync.rb. Cool. So what we're doing here, right? We can like, I'm just going to comment out this whole bit of code. Bloop. We can run this bad boy right here. Oh crap. Did I crash my whole? There we go. So if we want to get data back in Ruby, we would do something like this, right? We could be like, I'm actually gonna put a little binding.py action here. Cool. Come on, buddy. There we go. Uh-oh. What did I do? What's on my browser right now? Is it really that dog that tanked our whole thing? I'm blaming the dog. This is cursed. Closing it. Cool. Great. I'm gonna run this. And you'll notice, right? I have this like response that's being like, hey, send a GET request to this URL to give me the information for a Pokemon. The first Pokemon, which I think we already know the answer to, but just in case you don't, we can like then go into the response, right? Be like JSON.parse response. You can set that equal to Pokemon. And now we have this big hash representing our Pokemon. Call it Pokemon.keys. We can find out that Pokemon's name. Everybody, 1, 2, 3 all together. Which Pokemon is this going to be? It's going to be you're back in JavaScript land. That's what it's going to be. So you notice we get Bulbasaur, right? Like, and this is how we get information in Ruby, right? And if JavaScript were this simple, this would be a very short lecture. And I know that like it's easy to blame JavaScript for this. It's actually a function of how great JavaScript is. That's way less simple than this. I know that you're not going to believe me now, right? But I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to talk about something else for a second before we go back to fetching, right? In Ruby, if I want to like, does everyone remember what sleep does? It just says wait for 3 seconds, right? Cool. In Ruby, if I do this, right, it's going to say hello. It's going to wait for 3 seconds, and then it's going to put after sleep, right? So for 3 seconds, it just does nothing. And this is also kind of how network requests work in Ruby. In Ruby, it's going to go ahead and it's going to hit this REST client, right? .get, and it's going to wait for that response to come through, and then it's going to continue running its code. That's something Ruby will do. This is called synchronous execution. We wait, we like try to do something, we wait for it to be done, we go on to the next thing, right? And what I'm about to tell you is that JavaScript doesn't do it this way for very good reasons. So I'm going to like run this, and you'll see, right? We get response, we get the information back from the server, then we get a hello, right? And if that's we're good, right? If we were in JavaScript, I'm just gonna go, I think this hash is what's killing me. So I'm gonna go kill this real quick. Just too much information about Bulbasaur. Bulbasaur is too powerful. My computer is weak against Bulbasaur. But let's say I'm going to this page, and eventually what we're going to be doing is we're going to be going to this cosplay page, right? And we're going to be adding a feature that when I click add a dog, will go on and it will fill out, it'll like start adding some dogs from our server, right? Because we're doing cosplay cats, right? Fake cats, these are dogs. I'm actually going to double check that let's go delete this. Let's go delete all of this. Set this. I want this. Cool. So imagine right now that we're in JavaScript and I just coded a sleep function right here. Cool. Let's go delete these, right? So this sleep function, right? If I run it, first off, let's double check that this works. Cool. If I run the sleep function, and then I'm also going to like really quickly be like console.log hello, right? What did I do here? Oh, right. I think if this is milliseconds. If I do sleep 3000, then console log hello, it'll go ahead and it's going to wait a little while and then console log hello. Cool. This is a sleep function. What it's saying is, hey, subtract, like, let's start at this date, right? And then wait till there's a difference between the, like, okay, so new date gives you the time right now, right? So I'm saying, hey, let's create a starting time. And then when the time minus the starting time is less than whatever we've put in here, you're good. You can finish executing your JavaScript. Since sleep is a synchronous function, right? What it's going to therefore do is it's going to wait a bunch of time and then it's going to move on to the next bit of, it's going to move on to the next bit of code. So let's just try this again. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and invoke this. I'm going to be like sleep 5000, right? And then console log hello. And you'll notice some bad things start happening. My entire app was just locked down until this sleep executed. I can't click this button. I'm just like randomly clicking around. I accidentally opened up a whole different page. I, as a user, panicked and gave, like, I was that frustrated with this code, right? That thing stopped working, right? That like, I like clicked random things. So JavaScript can't be synchronous in its network requests because its job is to handle all of your events, right? If I did like this add a dog button, right? If I give this document.get element by ID dog button add event listener click. And then right now we can just, I'm going to start using arrow functions this lecture. I'm going to do one more time, just walking you through it. This is for now. If you're a repeat student, ignore that I'm about to say this. But an arrow function is very similar to writing function console.log, right? In that same location. So you notice you can't do this outside of the, like, in just like main scope, but like if I'm passing it as a callback function, it's totally okay to do this. But this is a gross way to write things. So this is going to go ahead and handle this for me. Click is the string name of a click event, right? So basically what this is going to do for us, right, is when we click it, it should console log woof, right? When we click our button, it should console log woof. And I'll refresh this page and you'll notice woof, 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 right? We're getting that? If I have something running synchronously for 5 seconds, suddenly I'm not getting any woofs, right? And I'm going to start as a user, I'm going to start bashing this down, be like, come on. And then I'm going to accidentally have clicked it 22 times. That's annoying. It's more annoying when that's the buy button for a store, right? So at this point, right, JavaScript doesn't have the luxury of being synchronous, and fetching to a database is like fetching to someone else's server is an exact example of something that we can't just have the server, our entire JavaScript code wait for, right? Because that, like, asking a website in a server in China to give me back a database worth of dogs could take me like 0.3 seconds, and that's 0.3 seconds where a user is really frustrated. So JavaScript came up with asynchronous JavaScript as a way of solving this problem. And basically what it does, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to start actually teaching you about fetch now. What JavaScript will do is, let's say I'm actually going to do one more thing before I do that. Let's do, instead of having a sleep, right? One very common pattern, instead of sleeping for 5 seconds and then doing something, is to do something like console.log hello, set timeout. And then we can do like a little arrow function being like timeout expired. That could be like 3 seconds. And we're gonna be like console.log goodbye, right? Does everyone know what this is gonna do? We're gonna console log hello. Oh wait, whoops. Can anyone tell me how this is going to behave exactly in the console? Yeah, Naomi, what's up?
So it's going to say hello first, and then it's going to put time expired within the 3 seconds, so you know what's going on, and then it's going to put goodbye.
So you're saying it's going to say hello, timeout expired, and then goodbye, and it's going to wait 3 seconds here?
Yeah. Well, while it's waiting, like while you're waiting, it's going to put the string timeout expired. Well, or
so
yeah,
the timeout, this fires after you wait, right? Anything inside of a timeout, this waits till something's done and then it fires this.
Oh, okay.
So at this point, actually what weirdly will happen, right? So we'll get hello, goodbye, and then timeout expired, right? And this is actually a great thing about JavaScript. What this is doing is saying, hey, while you're waiting 3 seconds, go do something else. The way this works is something called, let's see if I have this in the README. I definitely do. What the hell is the event loop right here? This is a 20-minute video, but if you like, first off, blog fodder. If you want to like be really wise on how events work in JavaScript, this is it. I really highly recommend this. If you can, let's open up a preview so we can actually see this link. This is a great lecture on like explaining exactly what's going on under the hood now. I'm going to like do my best to like broad strokes it, but highly recommend you dig into that README and look at it. So what's really happening is basically when you set a timeout to do something asynchronous, it goes into a different stack called the event loop, right? So it's running through its code, goes, oh, this tells me to get back to something later. I'm going to tell it to get like put this in a different stack of things I need to get to later, right? When something happens. In this case, when 3 seconds has expired, right? Then it goes on with the code, console logs goodbye. And then once it's finished running all of the synchronous code, it goes back to that stack and starts checking that stack for things that haven't been resolved yet and that should be resolved. And that's kind of how JavaScript works. Some of those events can be click handlers, right? Some of those events can be set timeout. Some of those events can be fetches. So yeah, right now, if we do this, right, I'm gonna hello, goodbye, and then 3 seconds later, timeout expired. So it ran through all of the rest of our code and it did this. Now, if I've just explained the event loop to you that way, right? What do you think will happen when I do this? Which order do they come out in?
It will
Should
be
be the
hello,
same.
timeout, expire, and goodbye.
So we've got two, right? We have one that says it's going to be hello, goodbye, and then timeout expired. And then the other one that says hello, timeout expired, goodbye. It's actually going to be hello, goodbye, timeout expired. It sees this, immediately goes, well, this is asynchronous. Let me throw it over to the stack that deals with that, right? And then after that, it goes ahead and does all the synchronous code. And then it finally hits timeout expired. So here is a weird thing, right?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's still gonna wait for like for 0 second for set timer.
Yeah, this is 0 milliseconds right now, is what this is saying.
Okay.
So right now, I've commented back in my sleep function. And remember, my sleep function is synchronous, right? So in this case, I'm going to do hello, 0 seconds of delay before a timeout expired. Goodbye, sleep for 5 seconds, then after sleep. Anyone want to guess which order this comes up in? I'll give this 4 seconds.
I'm gonna take a wild guess. So it's gonna say hello, goodbye, and then time expired, and then after sleep.
You'd hope that, right? Hello, goodbye, everything locks down, right? After sleep, timeout expired. Timeout expired is still the last one on the stack here. Really, when you're setting a timeout, what you're saying is give the event stack a heads up. They can run this code after this many milliseconds has elapsed. This doesn't say run this code in exactly this many milliseconds. It says this is when that condition becomes true. So basically, yeah, go ahead.
So pretty much, sorry. So set timeout console log will always be last, if anything.
Yeah, over anything
Okay.
over anything that's synchronous here.
All right.
And this becomes super important, right? Because at this point, this becomes why our fetches get weird. Let's say, for example, right, that I wanted to be like, let cheese equal 0, right? And then here, I were to do cheese equals 1,000 and console log value of cheese what's the value of cheese going to be when I console log it?
Zero.
1,000.
You had 0 and 1,000, right? So let's try this out. Value of cheese is 0. When I call it again in the console, it's 1,000. The reason for this is because we established cheese is 0. It sees this function to execute after set timeout expires. Then it continues running all my synchronous code. And then only when that's done does it finally run the function here. Cool. So this becomes important because when I say that fetch is asynchronous, that means it's going to be sending data over the internet while other things are happening in JavaScript. So you're not just going to be able to be like data, let cheese equal data. And I'll show you that in a second. I'm going to show you what that does. Right now, where you can go ahead and actually start writing a fetch request. One thing that I would urge you to just get into your like brains, using fetch MDN. Google it, live it, love it. This is a page that you should know how to access at any given time. I actually managed to get through my first 2 gigs as a teacher. Without actually memorizing all the syntax or writing like a post request, because I have this and I like Googling instead of memorizing things. So a general fetch looks like this. And I'm going to show you what that looks like in a sec. Basically, there's like post request data. You should know about how to upload JSON data, and you should know the general fetch request. To start out with, we need a fetch to an API, to a route. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy this, right? And I'm going to just right here, fetch here. Cool. And you'll notice, right? If I do like const response equals fetch, or like let response equals fetch, you'll see I actually get something pretty weird. I get something called a promise object. This will not have the dog in it, right? Fetch does not return the response you're looking for. There's no situation where you can be like, let response equal fetch until you get to asynchronous async await, in which case they've like written some cool syntax for you to do this, right? What it gives us is actually a promise. What it's saying is JavaScript functions need to return something. I want to return the indication that you will eventually get something from this function. And you'll notice like promise becomes like goes from a pending promise to a fulfilled promise. But even when we get this fulfilled promise, there's nowhere you can like dig in here that has the actual data. We still need to do work here to make this work. Instead, what we do is we chain something called a dot then onto things, right? And if I'm going to just like pull up the documentation, right? We can go ahead. First off, we basically go like, hey, first fetch to this URL. Dot then, once you get back that prompt, once you get back the value from that promise, do something with it, right? In this case, I'm just going to be like data console.log data. Cool. Then take whatever data it sends over and console log it. And you'll notice I actually get like a weird, I get a response object, right? I still can't find the data in here. But this whole thing returns a promise, but inside here, it'll console log out like this cool response, right? The general practice for a fetch, and this is something that you're eventually going to get used to, and it's like a weird thing it's a weird thing to kind of teach. But basically, I'm just going to copy this exact thing. I go ahead, right, and I take this, what I'm going to end up saying is, hey, first make a fetch to this URL, then take the response and parse it as JSON. And the fact that this yielded back a promise object, can anyone who's been paying really close attention, despite the fact that I don't think I taught this particular bit very well, can anyone tell me what the fact that the dot then data to console log JSON data is? Like what it returns? I'm actually like, I don't know if I would be able to follow me. It returns a promise, which means that like this second dot then is also going to be like, eventually this whole thing is also asynchronous, right? Take the response and parse it as JSON is going to be asynchronous. And then once we're done doing that, we can console log. And then we actually get this message saying, hey, there's this URL and it's got a success. So we can go ahead and copy this. And we get a dog, right? Rather than just assume you all got that, because I didn't even get how I was explaining that really quickly. The dot then returns a promise, usually, yes, that you can then chain onto, right? So I'm going to go ahead and do this. You usually end up having two dot thens. It's very common to see students do be like data, console log, data. I get nervous about this code because it's redundant, right? Like this is the same thing as just writing console log. What we're doing right here. Yeah, message is probably like, if we take a look at our dog API, it says, hey, we will yield back an object that has message inside of it and also status of success. That's just this API's decision, right? Sometimes you might just get it back a dog directly, depending on the API. But you will usually end up with, when you're writing a fetch, an initial fetch statement, which will have, if you're doing something other than a GET request or doing something with API keys, a bunch of stuff in here, right? But then after you say like, hey, this is how I want to build out my request. The original fetch is basically building a request saying like, hey, I want to make a GET request to this URL with these headers, with this information. Then when you give me the response, immediately parse it as JSON. And then, or not immediately, asynchronously parse it as JSON. And then I usually stack the console log there, make sure that I got the right data back, and then we can start coding from there. So to show you that that works, right? This whole chain will need to be saved over. You'll notice I get this message success, right? So this is the point where if we were to like create a let's actually create a add dog function. Oh, let's do this the other way. Let's go ahead and we'll just, in our cosplay.html, we have this div with the class of dogs. It'd be like document.query selector dogs .dogs .inner HTML plus equals div /div image source equals image URL alt equals a dog. Cool. So like we can test out that this works, right? If I got this console log dog function, right? I can just copy this right here. I could be like add dog this, And if we refresh the page, we will now have a dog, right? Everyone see how this works? We're not using our fetch yet. We are just taking a URL and using it to add an image of a dog, right? We can even right here, we can be like, hey, add dog is our method, our function, right? Cool. And then if we go ahead and test this out, now we get a button, right? Which will go ahead and do bloop, 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 bloop. What? Oh, right. I'm passing an E there. That's embarrassing. Cool. One more try. Boop, 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 boop. Yeah. This is still not using fetch, right? Now, one very common pattern that students do, right? Students will try to do at least once, right? Is they'll do something like, cool, and then take response and do this. Let dog, right? Dog dot equals response dot message, right? And we can test this out, and you'll be like in the console, you'll be like, hey, check that out. Now I've got a dog. It just came out. I've got this. This code works, right? If I did this afterwards, what do we think will happen? Oh, wait, whoops. Let's do add dog, dog. If I were to take this dog that I defined here and then use this with, right? And I call add dog on it. What'll happen?
We're gonna get a picture, right?
You'd hope so, right? But instead, you get a broken file. Dog is defined in the console. You get a broken file right here. And once you can explain why this is, you'll be a JavaScripting, you'll be a fetching master. Or especially, let's see if I can do this one other way. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to say this whole function is now function add dog. I'll make this function instead do a fetch, like do this like let dog, right? Then go ahead and do this. So instead, I'm just gonna like make this, hey, now you can just add a dog directly. So to be clear, what I'm doing here, right? Let dog, establishing that this variable exists, right? Fetch. Use the dot then to overwrite dog with the response.message, and then add this dog to the DOM. Cool. You'll actually see a couple of pretty unusual behaviors. First time I add dog, oops, image URL is not defined. Oh, right, dog. Cool. If I click this, first time it's broken. Second time, what? Let's do this out here. This demonstrates what I'm trying to do better. That dog. Boop. Cool. First one's undefined. Second one, we get a dog. Third one, we also get a dog. Fourth one, we get a dog. We keep double clicking. We get more dogs. If I click fast enough, there's a situation where sometimes I get 2 dogs in a row. Two times the same dogs in a row. It's not about how I appended it. That's still not quite the issue, right? But you're getting closer, right? DOM content loaded does bring up the problem. Why is it that the first time I add a dog, it is undefined? You can actually see if I like look over here, if I inspect this dog, you'll see that this dog has a source of undefined. Undefined was passed in there. And then also, why is it that sometimes when I click it really fast, I get two dogs that are the same dog?
Line 12, why do you have response in that JSON?
Why do I ever? Oh, this is just what we call the argument. We can call this JSON.
Oh,
We
that's
can-
right. We can call it anything, right?
Yep.
All right, you're right.
Um,
What if you like made a constant
like a
and then
constant?
fetch the constant or within the functions?
You can do
Sorry,
this.
I don't even know if I'm addressing the actual problem.
Yeah, it's a little weird, right? This is something where you kind of have to be a JavaScripting master to really figure this one out. When I mentioned, right, that fetches were asynchronous, right? When this button, click, add dog, right? When this function runs, this fetch runs, then this fetch, then this, right? And this runs. In what order does this happen? Which line of code runs first? This or this?
The 15, right?
Line 13.
So we've got line 15, line 13, right? This whole thing is asynchronous. This waits for this fetch to be done first, right? So this is actually going to run after, right? So what's actually happening, right? The reason it's undefined is because we click add dog the first time. It goes ahead, it sees this add dog, this fetch, it runs, right? But it's running this fetch asynchronously. So while it's waiting for a response to a server, it goes back and creates this dog that's currently undefined. While this fetch is running, it doesn't run the rest of these until it's already run this line of code. And while it's run this line of code, dog is undefined the first time. The second time I click it, often, because after this, right? After this whole function runs once, dog is going to be defined, right? It's going to be defined as the previous fetch. So the second time I click it, it's going to run this. It's going to render the first dog, the one that I should have rendered the first time. And then it's going to update dog with the second one, right? And this is also why if I click it really fast, sometimes I can get two dogs, two copies of the same dog before both of their previous fetches run, right? Kind of frustrating, kind of nuts. But what this is, the important thing to know here is that this dot then statement is going to run before anything you write after this then. Like this is going to happen first before your dot then statements. So as a JavaScript developer and a student, if you want something to happen when a fetch is complete, you execute it from the dot then. Cool. Just going to go ahead right here. I'm going to say, hey, const dog equals this. Do this. Cool. Here, when I refresh the page, this now works every single time with a new dog each time. That's the correct dog. And this becomes the design pattern for using a fetch, right? Inside this callback is where you give instructions for what to do after this callback. If I ever see you writing code right here, be like console.log dog outside the fetch, I will be not surprised at all because that's going to be very normal for the first 3 weeks of you writing this. By week 7 or week 8, you should always be thinking about what your callback's executing. Usually a much better thing to do, right? So be like append dog. the dot message, right, happens to do with this fetch specifically, right? This fetch specifically gives us back an object that has a key of JSON of message, right? If I were to use Kanye.rest, yeah, I can like, this one is just going to go ahead and give me, if I fetch this, I don't need to like use a message. Like, boop, fetch, but then res to res.json, but then console.log. Quote, I'd like to meet with Tim Cook. I got some ideas. I think that's a great idea. So in this case, it would be quote that we'd be calling it under. If we want to get the string, we'd be like response dot quote, right? But the important thing is this whole thing expects what this is really, because I think this syntax loses people. What this is a callback function. Function response they give me console.log response they give me. Yeah. Boop. This can be whatever function you want. You can go ahead and write like function append dog response const dog URL equals response dot message, and then we did document query selector dogs. I shouldn't have deleted this. Here we go. Yes, dogs dot inner HTML plus equals div slash div image source equals dog URL alt equals dog. I can just pass this whole thing in right here. And this function will still work. Yeah. This is just a callback function where we'll by default pass in response as the argument to that callback function. Cool. There's one other thing that I'm going to show you before we move on to doing a little bit of live coding, right? Dot catch is a cool thing you can do. And this waits for us. This is in case of a server error, it allows you to handle it. So let's say I was to do like a weird fetch to www.google.com, right? Which Google will be like, I have no idea who you are, go away, right? It gives me like, it goes like, hey, you can't fetch from this website, CORS issues, right? But then this console log will come up being like, hey, this was actually a type error and it said failed to fetch, right? Dot catch is another useful thing that you should know about. Eventually we're going to be using this to do some error handling. Depending on how you build your servers is very helpful. With that being said, right? Notice, big rules, big takeaway. If you want something to happen after a fetch, it better be executed in this dot then, the second dot then. Cool. We all feeling okay about that? Cool. This is the most default fetch. Eventually, we're going to be showing you how to like make post requests and how to make patch requests and delete requests. And then we'll be using Rails servers to like actually generate stuff. In terms of, wait, just double checking my note to make sure that I've covered off everything I want to before we go into this thing. Cool. The last thing I wanted to build, right? Right now we have this feature, whoops, this feature that we just broke. Ooh, just heard thunder. Nice, very New York centered chat today. But here we now have, right? I also have this cats page, right? Which you remember from when we built out cats. I added the form as a fun thing for next to like give you a little preview. But right now this cats page is running using this cats array that I defined. That would actually be an excellent theme to just like randomly pivot to. But like right now I have this array that just exists already without me needing to do anything with it. So inside my cats.js, all I'm doing to render cats is I'm calling render cats on cats, right? Like this array that I currently have access to. I'm going to delete this. And I'm going to remove this from the scripts. Cool. So we no longer have this cats array. Instead, so notice eventually what we want to do is we want to call render cats on an array of cats, right? That's what this code does. We're all cool on that, right? If I could get an array of cats in here, it would render them for me, right? Now here, I have a cats.json file. And in the README, I have a description for how to, let's go ahead and delete this line. I have a description for how to go ahead and use this, right? There's a cool little tool called Json Server that will allow you to create a RESTful server immediately with some JSON data. So notice that I run Json Server cats.json right after I had already installed this package. And if I now go to localhost 3000/cats, I get an API that's serving me an array of cats. Cool. Do you all see how that works? For the rest of class, the last 5 minutes, right until 7:25 Eastern time, I'm going to split you all up into groups of two groups, I think, right? And what I'm going to want you to do is I'm going to want you to first I'm going to want you to clone down this repo. And I want you to use Json Server as your API to render out a set of cats. Cool. This is the actual GitHub repo. Let me know once you've cloned it down. Give me a thumbs up if you're planning on doing that. I would like for at least 3 or 4 thumbs up. This one. And then try to install Json Server to run this in the command line. It's at the bottom of the README. You get another thumbs up from anyone yet? Cool. So at this point, I will begin splitting you up. Boop. Zoom recording. Cool. So right now we have this render cats function, right? That we know if we give it an array of cats will work, right? So I think everyone got to the point where they know that if they write fetch to local http://localhost 3000/cats, right? This is going to give us a promise that then res to res.json. This is going to give us a promise that then if you did like response to like console.log response, right? So we can chain this, we can make this legible, right? Cool. Oops, no. Fine. Cool. You'll notice this returns a promise. Like this whole fetch is going to return a promise, but then it's going to console log an array of 7 cats, right? And this is
Bad.
what?
Oh, sorry. I see totally what we did. I see what we did.
So a very common pattern, right? Or a very common thing that I think everyone thinks about is like, cool, then how do I get from this response to cats, right? But that's I don't think the right way to go about it. Like, don't try to be like cats equals res and then this, right? We've learned from our mistake there, right? This is going to break. Cats is not defined, and then eventually it is, right? Instead, what we want to do, any behavior you want to happen as a result of the fetch should go in the second then. So render cats res would work. Boop. Take the resulting array you get back, pass it in as an argument to render cats when you're done with that fetch. How do we feel about that? Do you have questions about how this works? This is what I mean when I say that what you do with the response should happen in the second then. The quickest way to write this is just then render cats, right? And that argument is already going to be passed into cats. Loop goes ahead and works. So before you start thinking about defining variables outside your fetch and then changing them from inside your fetch, just know that that's always going to lead you to some errors, right? Instead, just get used to sending a callback function.
I have a question. So here on line 27, we call the function render cats here. Oh,
Yeah. Oh, so this is the, are you talking about the same code Ryan is right now?
yes.
I'm going to, Ryan, you're going to be so upset. I'm going to copy this code. Cool. Whoops. Copy. Well, so you got this const fetch cats, right? It's going to make a fetch to http://localhost 3000//. Then it's going to take this response. Then it's going to render cats, right? So I'm going to refresh this. You'll notice that nothing happens. Can anyone guess why nothing happened? No, actually, I'm not going to make it so that somebody else can say it. What happened is you got to run fetch cats. If you define it inside of a function, there you go.
So if we just got rid of line 29, it would run.
Considering it's identical to this, yeah.
All right. Well,
Cool.
now I'll never make that mistake again.
Oh, yes, you will. I make that mistake all the time. Everyone in JavaScript always makes the mistake of defining a function then not invoking it. It is very normal. It's nothing to be ashamed of. And eventually you will all be able to pair program for that and spot it for each other, but it's very normal. The last thing that I'm going to say, the last error that I think students will often run into, a lot of students will forget the parentheses here. And then you get nothing. You get cats that for each is not a function at render cats. It says, I'm really confused here. That's because response to JSON is a function that needs to be invoked. Cool. I'd urge you to, at some point, find something to fetch Kanye.rest, dog CEO, all great things, right? And try to fetch something and then render it to a page before Thursday. Cool. Great job, everyone. I know this is a hard one. I know this is an incredibly difficult one to teach because asynchronicity is very goofy. But you all stuck in there. Great job.
Thank you.
Thanks.